On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on a plane that hit the World Trade Center. He overslept. He had a hangover. He missed the gate by 10 minutes. The plane he should have been sitting on killed every person aboard it. And the show he had not yet built into a global comedy empire was in that moment 12 minutes away from becoming a footnote about a young animator who died young. Family Guy exists because of a hangover. That fact alone should not be true. And it is true. And once you know it is true, every other strange thing about the show starts feeling earned. Tonight, the entire conspiracy library gets opened. The cancellations, the banned episodes, the predictions that turned out to be real, the fan theories that explain everything, the death the writers had to undo. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's get started. The hangover that saved Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane and Flight 11. The night of September 10th, 2001 was a normal night for a young animator who had recently become the youngest showrunner in television history. Seth MacFarlane was 27 years old. Family Guy had been on the air for 2 seasons. The ratings were soft. The show had already faced one quiet conversation about cancellation, and MacFarlane had spent the evening at the Rhode Island School of Design, his old college, giving a guest lecture to a room of art students who looked up to him because he had managed to do the thing every one of them dreamed about. He had made a TV show. It was on Fox. People in the room knew his name. After the lecture, he went out for drinks. The version of the story that has now been told more times than he probably wants to think about is simple. He drank too much. He stayed up too late. He went to bed knowing he had a flight in the morning. He set an alarm. He slept through it. The flight was American Airlines Flight 11, scheduled to leave Boston Logan Airport at 7:45 in the morning, headed to Los Angeles. MacFarlane was supposed to be in seat 40-something, somewhere in the back, with a hangover and a paper coffee cup and a few hours of sleep ahead of him on the plane. He was not the only person from the entertainment world booked on that aircraft. The actress Jamie Presley had been booked on it, but canceled the night before because the morning departure was, in her own words, too early. The actor Mark Wahlberg had been booked on it, but switched at the last minute to a private jet to a film festival in Toronto. David Angel, the co-creator and executive producer of Frasier, was on the plane with his wife Lynn. They did not make a different choice. They were on it when it took off. MacFarlane was running late from the moment he opened his eyes. According to the version of events he has told in interviews, his travel agent had given him a departure time of 8:15 in the morning, when the actual departure was 7:45. He thought he had 30 more minutes than he had. He got to the airport, walked to the counter, and was told by the agent that the gate had just closed. He had missed the flight by 10 minutes. He shrugged, found a seat in the airport lounge, and went back to sleep. He woke up about 40 minutes later. By that point, the plane he was supposed to be on had already been hijacked, flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and had killed every person on board. He sat in the lounge and watched the news with everyone else. Most of the public did not know any of this for years. Family Guy was already living through its own slow-motion disaster at the time. Fox was unsure what to do with it. The ratings were getting worse. Seth MacFarlane was, in the eyes of the network, a young guy whose first show was not really working. The fact that he had nearly died in the most public mass casualty event in American history was, in the busy months after the attacks, mostly a private detail. He told friends. He told family. He did not give a tearful interview about it on a morning show. The show kept going. He kept going. And when interviewers eventually did ask him about it, the answer he gave was strange in its calmness. He told Howard Stern, in a now famous radio appearance in 2009, that he was not really a fate guy. He said the experience rattled him for a couple of weeks, and then he had to put it in the back of his head, because he was a comedy writer, and a comedy writer cannot walk around all day thinking about how close they came to dying. He said he had missed other flights for the same reason before. People miss flights all the time. He framed the entire thing as a normal hangover that happened to overlap with a national tragedy. That answer, in a quiet way, became the seed of one of the smaller, stranger conspiracies that has followed him for the last 20-something years. Because the moment you sit with the story for a few minutes, a few of the details start to feel just slightly off. The first detail people fixate on is the one that lives in the public airline records. After the attacks, the United States government did a very thorough investigation into who had been booked on the 4 hijacked planes, who had canceled, who had been a no-show, and when each of those things had happened. The records of those investigations are public. They list every passenger by status. And in those records, the cancellation linked to MacFarlane is logged not at 7:45 in the morning, when the gate would have closed, but at 6:34 in the morning, more than an hour before the plane took off. 6:34 in the morning is not the time of a man rushing to the counter and being told he is too late. 6:34 in the morning is the time of someone calling ahead and canceling, or the time of an agent processing processing a cancellation that was made the night before and not entered into the system until the morning shift. Or, in the most boring possible reading, a clerical timestamp that does not actually represent the moment a human being made a decision. The people who lean toward a more suspicious reading point at this gap. They argue that the official record and the public story do not line up. They argue that someone who knows what is going to happen on a plane has reason to cancel the booking before the morning rush. They argue that McFarlane has spent 2 decades joking about it, and that the joking is itself a way of keeping the question from being taken seriously. The same group of people in the same conversations point at the fact that the show would later get a reputation for so-called predictions, and they connect that reputation to this morning at the airport, as if knowing the future on one day might explain knowing the future on others. The people who lean toward the boring reading point at much simpler things. They point out that timestamps in airline cancellation records are notoriously messy. They point out that Mark Wahlberg also canceled, and nobody thinks Mark Wahlberg knew anything. They point out that Jamie Presley canceled the night before. They point out that statistically, on any flight of about 90 people, you will always find some who almost did not get on it and some who almost did. They point out that McFarlane was 27 years old, working too much, drinking like a 27-year-old, and missing flights was completely consistent with the rest of his life at that time. They point out that he overslept, walked to the gate, and went to a lounge to keep sleeping, which is the behavior of a hungover person, not someone covering up secret knowledge. There is a third detail that adds a layer of strangeness without really proving anything. McFarlane has said that the experience did not haunt him the way people expect it should have. He has said it was rattling for a few weeks, and then he moved on. Some people hear that and think it sounds healthy, the kind of thing a grounded person would say. Other people hear it and think it sounds rehearsed, like a line he has practiced because he has had to give it so many times. Both readings are valid. Neither one proves anything. What the story does prove, beyond any doubt, is that the entire body of work the world now knows as the McFarlane comedy empire was almost erased before it really started. The Family Guy that came back from cancellation in 2005 would not have come back because there would have been nobody to bring it back. American Dad would not exist. The Cleveland Show would not exist. The Ted movies would not exist. The Orville would not exist. Robot Chicken, which leaned heavily on Seth Green and the Family Guy team, would have looked completely different. Dozens of staff writers, animators, and voice actors who built their careers on his shows would have ended up somewhere else, on different projects, doing different work. There is a specific small detail in the timeline that makes this even more uncomfortable to think about. The first new episode of Family Guy to air after the attacks was a season 3 episode that went out on September 19th, 8 days after the towers fell. If McFarlane had been on that plane, that episode would almost certainly have been dedicated to his memory. The same way the first new episode of Frasier after the attacks was dedicated to David Angel, who actually was on that plane. The team would have buried him with a card before the credits. The show would probably have wrapped up the season it had already produced, and Family Guy would now exist in cultural memory as a beloved cult comedy that died young. People would talk about it the way they talk about Freaks and Geeks. They would say it had so much promise. They would say it was a shame. Instead, he overslept. There is one more piece of this story that gets less attention than the rest, and it might be the most honest part. After the attacks, McFarlane had a quiet stretch where his work got darker, drier, and more openly nervous about death. The show had always made jokes about death. The show would always make jokes about death. But there are sequences from the years right after, particularly involving Brian, where the writing slows down and starts looking at mortality without flinching. And you can read those moments as the work of a writer's room with a boss who had recently been forced to think about his own. None of this is the kind of thing a person announces. It is the kind of thing a person works out by writing. He has been clear in interviews that he does not believe in fate. He has said he does not believe the morning meant anything beyond the simple fact that he overslept. The official record of the cancellation says one thing. His memory says another. The plane he should have been on hit a building 18 minutes after takeoff, and everyone he would have been sitting near is dead. When people now point to Family Guy and call it a show that knows things, that sees things coming, that hides messages in cutaways, the smarter version of the conversation always loops back to this morning. It is the foundation underneath the whole rumor. Once you have a creator who almost died on a hijacked plane, every weird coincidence after that gets read through that filter. A joke about Kevin Spacey 12 years before the news breaks. A cutaway about the Boston Marathon a month before the bombing. An offhand line that sounds, in retrospect, like a warning. The pattern is loose enough to be coincidence and tight enough enough to be unsettling, and the morning of September 11th, 2001 sits underneath all of it as the founding moment of the whole conspiracy. It is the day the show was almost over, and the day every joke that followed got to be made. The boring answer is the right one. He had a hangover. The plane left without him. He went to sleep in the lounge. The world ended on television while he napped. The interesting answer, the one the conspiracy crowd keeps reaching for, is that some part of his life was rerouted that morning, and the show that came out of the rerouted version of his life was always going to feel like it was operating on a slightly different timeline than everyone else. A show whose creator should not, by any reasonable accounting, be alive to have made it. A show that exists in defiance of one of the most efficient tragedies of the 21st century. A show that, for the rest of its run, would tell jokes about September 11th that almost no other show was willing to tell, partly because no other show had a creator with a personal claim on the day. He has never tried to claim that on air. He has never used the morning to lend the show weight. The closest he has come is to laugh about it, which is the only response a comedy writer is allowed to have. But the joke is real. The morning is real. The records are real. The slight, quiet gap between his version and the airline version is real, and the entire mountain of weirdness, of strange coincidences, of moments where the show seems to know more than it should, all of that mountain rests on the morning he overslept, and the world rearranged itself behind him while he dozed in an airport lounge. That morning is where every Family Guy conspiracy begins. Every prediction that turned out to be true, every banned episode the network refused to air, every fan theory about what the show is really doing under the hood, all of it sits on the foundation of a hangover. The show should not exist. It does. And once a show should not exist but does, every other strange thing about it starts feeling earned. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings up an obvious question. If the morning of September 11th nearly ended Family Guy before it really began, what actually almost killed it the second time, 3 years later, when the network looked at the ratings and decided it had seen enough? The story of how the show came back from the dead is much less mystical than a hangover, and somehow much weirder. Section 2, The Cancellations, How a Show Died Twice and Came Back from a DVD Box Set. Family Guy did not survive its first run because it was loved. It survived because of a small, strange business decision made by a network that was trying to get rid of it cheaply, and a box set of plastic discs that nobody at Fox thought would matter. The full story of how the show came back from the dead is one of the most unlikely revivals in modern American television, and the people who run it now do not always like to talk about how close it came to being a footnote. The first thing worth getting straight is that the show did very well on the night it premiered. On January 31st, 1999, Fox put Family Guy in the time slot right after the Super Bowl. About 22 million people watched the first episode. By the standards of any normal new comedy, that is a triumphant launch. By the standards of a Super Bowl lead-out slot, where shows often get an even bigger audience boost from the football crowd that has nowhere else to go, the number was actually a little soft. Fox executives looked at the rating, did some math, and started getting nervous about whether the audience would stick around when the show moved to its real time slot. The real time slot was the problem. Fox put the show on Sunday nights at first, which was fine, but then moved it to Thursday nights at 8, which was a death sentence. Thursday at 8 was the slot that all the major networks fought over. NBC was airing Frasier, which was at the top of its run. Survivor was about to launch on CBS and become the biggest reality show in American history. Friends was the most watched comedy on television. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a national phenomenon on ABC. Family Guy, a young animated comedy with a cartoon baby plotting murders and a cartoon dog drinking martinis, was being asked to compete against 4 of the most powerful shows on television at the same time. The ratings cratered. They cratered the way you would expect them to crater. Family Guy was getting beaten by everything, including some shows that were not particularly good, simply because nobody could find it on the schedule, and the people who could find it were watching one of the other 4 options. By the end of season 2, in 2000, Fox had decided it was done. The first cancellation happened quietly. Most viewers did not even hear about it. Then, just as quietly, the network reversed course. Somebody at Fox decided to give the show one more season. Season 3 got greenlit. The catch was that it would air on Thursdays at 8 again, opposite Friends and the breakout success of Survivor, which by then was the most talked about show on the planet. The ratings were even worse the second time around. By 2002, Fox was finished for real. The cancellation was announced. The writers were told to wrap up the unaired episodes they had in the pipeline. The show was over. There was one episode that had been produced but not aired, called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. Machine, which Fox had refused to broadcast because of the subject matter. That episode would sit on a shelf for years, and it would eventually become important to the story of the show in its own way. But for now, in 2002, the simple story was that Family Guy had been canceled twice, and the second time, it really meant it. The Griffin family was done. Most canceled shows die there. The reruns get sold cheaply to a cable network that runs them in graveyard time slots, the cast moves on, the writers find new jobs, and the title fades. Family Guy was supposed to die there. The thing that saved it was a combination of two business decisions, neither of which had anything to do with the quality of the show, and both of which involved nobody at Fox really paying attention. The first decision happened at Cartoon Network. By 2003, Cartoon Network had launched a late-night programming block aimed at adults called Adult Swim. The block ran cartoons for grown-ups after 11 at night, when the kids were supposed to be in bed. Adult Swim needed content. It needed something with a recognizable name. It needed a show that had already been animated, was already finished, and was available cheap. Cartoon Network approached Fox about buying the rerun rights to Family Guy. The president of Fox Television at the time later admitted that the network sold the rights almost for free. There was no bidding war. There was nobody else trying to buy them. As far as Fox was concerned, the show was a failed asset, and getting any money at all for the existing episodes was a bonus. The deal was done. Adult Swim started airing reruns on April 20th, 2003. The reruns became the most watched program on the entire Adult Swim block, almost immediately. Adult Swim audiences had never seen Family Guy in its original Fox run, because most of them had been in college or just out of college, watching different things on different nights. The show found a completely new audience that had not been there during the original broadcast. Late-night viewership of Family Guy on Cartoon Network jumped by more than 200% in some measurements. The show that had been beaten by everything on Thursday nights was now beating everything in its new time slot. That alone would have been a nice business story. It might have been enough, eventually, to get the show back on the air. But the second decision is the one that really did it. In the same week that Adult Swim premiered the reruns, Fox released the complete first and second seasons of Family Guy on DVD. This was deliberate timing. Whoever was in charge of home video at Fox knew that the Adult Swim launch would create attention, and they wanted the box set to be ready to take advantage of it. The DVDs were cheap to produce, the show was already finished, and there was no real downside to putting them in stores. The expectation was that the box set would sell modestly. Most TV on DVD releases at that point did not sell huge numbers. The market for the format was still pretty small. People bought DVD box sets of their absolute favorite shows, and that was about it. The Family Guy box set sold 400,000 copies in its first month. That number is not a typo. 400,000 copies of a TV on DVD release in a single month was unheard of for a canceled show. It was unheard of for most current shows. It was the kind of number that made Fox executives stop, look at each other, and ask if the report was right. It kept selling. By the time the reporting was done, the first Family Guy box set had sold 2.2 million copies. That made it the second best-selling television DVD of all time at that point. The only TV box set selling faster was the first season of Chappelle's Show on Comedy Central. The third season DVD release would later cross 1 million copies on its own. This is the moment the entire conspiracy of how Family Guy came back from the dead really lives in. Because what was happening in 2003 and 2004 was that a show that had been canceled twice was outselling almost every show on television in a brand new format that nobody had figured out how to read yet. The Adult Swim ratings were one signal. The DVD sales were another. Together, they painted a picture of an audience that did exist for the show. The audience had just never been able to find it on the original Fox schedule. Inside the Fox building, executives started having uncomfortable conversations. The network had canceled the show twice. The network had given up on it. Now the network was looking at sales numbers from its own home video division that suggested the show might be one of the most popular things they had ever owned. Fans were sending letters. Fans had organized online, in the early days of fan campaigns having any real power, demanding the show come back. Some fans had even bought multiple copies of the DVD, specifically because they had heard a rumor that strong sales could trigger a revival. That rumor turned out to be correct. On May 20th, 2004, Fox announced that it had ordered 35 new episodes of Family Guy. 3 years after the cancellation, the show was being brought back. It was the first time in the history of American television that a series had been revived because of DVD sales. There had been TV revivals before, but they had been driven by other things, like a cable network buying a canceled show outright, or a fan letter writing writing campaign, or a rights holder bringing back something for nostalgia reasons. Nobody had ever brought a show back specifically because the box sets were doing too well to ignore. Family Guy created the template that other shows would later follow. The new season, Season 4, premiered on May 1st, 2005, in a much safer time slot, Sundays, after The Simpsons. Almost 12 million people tuned in. The show that had been beaten by everything on Thursday nights was suddenly the strongest comedy on Fox's Sunday lineup. It has aired on Sunday nights more or less continuously ever since. The first episode of the revival, called North by North Quahog, contained a moment that made the whole story explicit. Peter, sitting in the living room, casually mentions to the family that they are back on television because Fox had to make room in their schedule, and then proceeds to read a list of more than 24 shows that Fox had canceled in the years that Family Guy was off the air. The list runs for an absurdly long time. It includes Dark Angel, Titus, Undeclared, Action, That 80s Show, Wonder Falls, Fastlane, Andy Richter Controls the Universe, Skin, Girls Club, Cracking Up, The Pits, Firefly, Get Real, Freaky Links, Wanda at Large, Costello, The Lone Gunman, A Minute with Stan Hooper, Normal Ohio, Pasadena, Harsh Realm, Keen Eddie, The Street, The American Embassy. Cedric the Entertainer presents The Tick, Luis, and Greg the Bunny. The joke is that Family Guy outlived all of them. The bigger joke is that the show was naming, by title, every program that had been considered more important than itself in the years it had been off the air. It is the kind of grudge a show can only hold when it is fully aware that it should not be there. The writers knew. The audience knew. Everyone watching the revival was watching a show that had been told it was not good enough twice and had come back anyway. There is one more wrinkle in this story that the conspiracy-minded part of the fan base has chewed on for years. The version of Family Guy that came back in 2005 was not, in many small ways, the same show that had been canceled in 2002. The animation was slightly cleaner, the cutaway gags were longer and more frequent, the characters were just a little louder, just a little meaner, just a little more flanderized than they had been before. Stewie's accent changed slightly, Brian started behaving differently, the dynamic between Peter and Lois was edited. A theory that has bounced around the fan world for years argues that the pre-cancellation Family Guy and the post-cancellation Family Guy are not actually the same show at all. They are two different shows with the same title and the same characters, separated by a 3-year gap in which the writer's room turned over, the network gave the show a new mandate, and the tonal balance shifted from gentle absurdity to something harder and more aggressive. There is a Reddit user who goes by the handle HoHoSwackyQuest who laid out the argument in detail, pointing to small inconsistencies in how the family treats Meg before and after the gap. Pre-cancellation Meg is loved by her family. Post-cancellation Meg is the punching bag of the household. The argument extends to the in-show time travel episode Back to the Pilot, in which Stewie and Brian travel back to the very first episode of the series and remark on how the early animation looks different. The official explanation is that the show was simply cheaper to make in 1999. The fan theory argues that they are actually traveling between two parallel universes, not 2 points in time, and that the show now operates as the second universe layered over the first. Whether you take that theory seriously or not, the underlying observation is fair. The show that died in 2002 and the show that came back in 2005 are tonally different, and the difference is large enough that longtime fans noticed. The conspiracy is just the most colorful way of describing a real shift. What is undeniable is that without the Adult Swim deal, without the DVD box set, without the strange, perfect timing of 2003, Family Guy would now be a footnote. It would be remembered as the cartoon that got canceled by Fox twice and never came back. The Griffin family would not be in syndication. The Stewie merchandise would not exist. The show would have ended at 50 episodes instead of the more than 400 episodes it has produced as of this season. Seth MacFarlane would not have become the comedy empire he became. American Dad would have been pitched as a debut show instead of a follow-up. The Cleveland Show would never have spun off. The Ted movies would not exist. A canceled show, a cheap rerun deal nobody else wanted, and a DVD box set that sold 400,000 copies in a month. That is the entire revival. 3 small business decisions, none of them dramatic, none of them planned, all of them lined up in a way that nobody could have predicted. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one detail from this period that does not quite fit the official story. The DVD box set that triggered the revival included the unaired episode that Fox had refused to broadcast, the one that had been sitting on the shelf for years. Years, the one about Peter trying to convert his son to Judaism for tax advice. That episode, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, finally aired on Adult Swim in November of 2003, and on Fox a year after that. The episode would survive the cancellation, survive the revival, and then, years later, get the show sued in federal court over a song that almost ended the entire production for a third time. Section 3. The Boston Marathon Prediction and How It Was Faked. The Boston Marathon bombing happened on April 15th, 2013. 2 homemade bombs went off near the finish line of the race, about 12 seconds apart, killing 3 people and injuring more than 260 others. It was the worst attack on American soil since September 11th, and the country spent the next 4 days in a state of low-grade panic while law enforcement chased the 2 brothers who had built and planted the devices. The story dominated cable news, social media, and every conversation in every workplace in the country. In the middle of all of that, a video clip started spreading on the internet that seemed to suggest something deeply disturbing. The clip was about 30 seconds long. It came from an episode of Family Guy that had aired only about a month earlier, on March 17th of the same year. In the clip, Peter Griffin appears to win the Boston Marathon by getting in his car and mowing down the runners. Then, in what looks like the very next moment, Peter pulls out his cell phone, starts dialing a number, and detonates a series of bombs. The clip ends with explosions and chaos. People watched the clip and felt something cold move through them. The episode had aired about 4 weeks before the bombing. Peter had committed a fictional version of the same crime in the same city at the same race. The math seemed inescapable. The show had predicted it, or worse, the show had known about it. The clip went viral on YouTube within hours of the actual bombing. By the next morning, it was on every social media platform, every conspiracy forum, every comment section under every news article about the attack. The most aggressive amplifier of the clip was the radio host Alex Jones. Jones had spent his career building an audience around the idea that major American tragedies were not what they appeared to be on the news, and the Boston bombing was one of the events he latched onto hardest in that period. He posted the Family Guy clip on Twitter and on his website, presenting it as evidence that the bombing had been a so-called false flag operation, meaning a planned event that the government or some other powerful group had carried out and then blamed on someone else. The Family Guy clip, in his framing, was proof that the people who controlled mass media had been told about the plan in advance and had encoded it into a cartoon as a kind of dark inside joke. The problem with all of this, the problem that almost nobody who shared the clip in those first 48 hours bothered to check, was that the clip was a fake. Not a fake in the sense of being doctored with new animation, or having dialogue added to it that did not exist. Every frame in the clip was real. Every line of dialogue was real. The animation was the original animation from the original episode. The fake part was the editing. The clip had been put together by taking 2 completely separate scenes from the same episode and stitching them right next to each other to create the appearance of a single sequence. In the actual episode, the 2 scenes have nothing to do with each other. They are not even part of the same plot. They are not in the same act. One of them is a throwaway joke that happens for less than 10 seconds in the middle of an unrelated conversation, and the other is the climax of the episode, about 30 minutes of viewing time later. The episode is called Turban Cowboy. It is the 15th episode of the 11th season. The plot of the episode is that Peter takes up skydiving, has a bad accident in Las Vegas, ends up in a hospital where he meets a Muslim man named Mahmoud, becomes fascinated with the religion, slowly gets pulled into Mahmoud's social circle, and eventually realizes that the men he has been hanging out with are not just Muslims. They are members of a terrorist cell who are planning to bomb a bridge in Quahog. The story is about Peter being too dim to notice what is happening around him until it is far too late. About halfway through the episode, completely unrelated to the main plot, there is a cutaway gag of the kind Family Guy uses dozens of times per episode. Bob Costas, voicing himself, asks Peter how he won the Boston Marathon. The scene cuts to Peter in his car, driving over the runners on the race course. He waves at the camera as he runs people down. The whole bit is about 10 seconds long. It is a standalone joke about Peter being a terrible person, with no build-up and no payoff. The scene then cuts back to the main story and never mentions the marathon again. There are no explosions in that scene. There are no bombs. There is just a fat cartoon man in a car running over people while a sportscaster looks confused. The actual climax of the episode is completely different. Toward the end, Peter has been forced by the terrorist cell to drive a van full of explosives toward a bridge. Peter is wearing a wire and trying to talk Mahmoud out of the plan. The plan goes wrong, the police arrive, and the bomb is supposed to be defused. Peter, thinking it is all over, takes out his cell phone to call a restaurant to get their dinner table ready. As he dials, the bridge explodes in the background. The joke is that the bomb had been wired to a phone, and Peter has just accidentally triggered it from a safe distance by trying to make a dinner reservation. He runs away. The episode ends. The hoax video spliced these two completely separate scenes together. It cut from Peter in the car at the marathon directly to Peter dialing the phone, and then directly to the bridge exploding. To anyone who had not seen the actual episode, the edit looked seamless. It looked like Peter had run over the marathon runners, dialed his phone, and detonated bombs at the finish line, all in one continuous sequence. To anyone who had seen the actual episode, the edit was obviously fake within about 3 seconds, because the two scenes are not visually consistent, are not in the same setting, and do not flow into each other in any believable way. The hoax depended entirely on the audience never having watched the original. That audience turned out to be most of the internet. By the second day after the bombing, the clip had been shared millions of times. It had been embedded in articles on conspiracy websites, posted on every major social media platform, and retweeted by accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. Most people who shared it had not seen the original episode. Most people who shared it had no way of checking whether the clip was authentic. They saw something that looked like a smoking gun in a moment of genuine national fear, and they passed it along. The same psychological mechanism that makes people forward chain emails was working at internet scale on a story about a major terrorist attack with an edited cartoon clip as the supposed evidence. Seth MacFarlane addressed the hoax publicly. He did it on Twitter the day after the bombing. His statement was short and direct. He called the edited clip an abhorrent thing. He said the bombing was a crime and a tragedy. He said his thoughts were with the victims. There was no joke in the post. There was no defense of the show. He just identified the edit as a fake and made it clear that he found the existence of the fake offensive in the context of what had actually happened in Boston. Fox responded by pulling the entire Turban Cowboy episode from circulation. Fox.com removed it, Hulu removed it, Amazon removed it. The episode was scrubbed from every official streaming and digital platform that the network controlled. A Fox representative told the Chicago Sun-Times that the network had no immediate plans to air the episode again. The marathon scene, the one that had no explosions in it and was just a throwaway joke about Peter being a terrible driver, was now considered too sensitive to broadcast. The bridge bombing scene, which had nothing to do with the marathon at all, was tied to it by association. YouTube, after some pressure, took down the original hoax video that Alex Jones had tweeted, citing a violation of their policies against deceptive content. Other versions of the same edit kept popping up on the platform for weeks afterward, each one removed and replaced as the cycle continued. There was no way to fully erase the clip from the internet once it had been seen by millions of people, but the platforms could at least slow it down. The question that lingers from this story, the one that the conspiracy crowd has never fully accepted the boring answer to, is how the original episode came to contain a marathon scene at all. The cutaway about Peter winning the marathon by running people over had been written, animated, recorded, and approved months before the episode aired. The bombing happened almost exactly a month after the broadcast date. To people who already believed the show had a habit of predicting things, the timing felt impossible to write off as coincidence. The boring answer, which is also the correct one, has several parts. The first part is that comedy writers reach for whatever well-known cultural reference points are nearest to hand when they need a quick joke. The Boston Marathon is one of the oldest, most famous, most recognizable annual sporting events in the United States. It has been used in jokes, films, television episodes, advertisements, and stand-up routines for more than a century. Picking it as the setting for a quick gag about Peter being a bad driver is the kind of choice a writer's room makes in about 30 seconds. There is no special insight required. The marathon was already a comedy cliche before Family Guy used it. The second part of the answer is that the idea of someone bombing the Boston Marathon was not new in any way. There is a self-published novel from 2002 called Heartbreak Hill, written by a man named Tom Lonergan, which describes a series of terrorist bombings at the Boston Marathon in detail. Almost nobody read it, but it existed. There is a film from 2010 called Four Lions, in which a group of bumbling extremists try to attack the London Marathon. The general scenario of attacking a major public race place had been imagined by writers for years before it actually happened. Family Guy was not predicting anything that had not already been written about by other writers in other contexts. The third part of the answer involves a different episode of an entirely different show. The same week that Family Guy pulled Turban Cowboy from rotation, a repeat episode of New Girl, the Fox sitcom about a group of friends sharing an apartment, was also pulled by the network. The reason was that the New Girl episode contained a single throwaway line about a suspicious duffel bag. There were no bombings depicted. There was no marathon. There was just one line of dialogue that had become uncomfortable in the context of what had happened. The New Girl episode had also been written and produced months in advance. Nobody on the New Girl writing team had been predicting anything either. The line just landed wrong after the fact. The truth that the Family Guy clip exposed about the way conspiracy theories spread is more interesting than the conspiracy itself. People wanted the clip to be real. They wanted to believe that someone had known something. The alternative, which is that a cartoon writer's room had used the marathon as a generic setting for a generic joke and gotten unlucky in their air date, felt too small to match the size of the tragedy. A national event of that size demanded a national explanation. A bored writer making a hack joke about Peter running people over was not big enough to satisfy the need. The hoax succeeded because it provided that bigger explanation in a portable, shareable, 30-second package. It did not matter that the package was assembled from parts that did not actually fit together. The package looked complete to anyone who did not check. There is one detail from this whole story that does not get talked about much, and it might be the most important one. The actual bombers, the two brothers who built and planted the bombs, had no connection to Family Guy. They had not seen the episode, they were not inspired by it. The investigation into their motives, which was extensive, did not turn up any reference to a cartoon, or to the show, or to anything related to it. The bombing was planned and carried out for entirely different reasons by two specific human beings whose identities and methods were established within days of the attack. The cartoon had nothing to do with it. The cartoon was just a piece of unrelated comedy that happened to share a setting with a real-world horror 4 weeks apart. What the Family Guy hoax really tells us is something about the audience the show had built by 2013. By that point, the show had been on the air for almost 15 years. It had a reputation for jokes that pushed limits. It had a reputation for being the kind of show where dark, uncomfortable, transgressive material got greenlit on a regular basis. Audiences had come to expect that the show would go places other shows would not. So when a real-world tragedy happened in Boston, and a clip surfaced suggesting the show had foreseen it, people did not pause to ask whether the clip was real. They believed it on first viewing because it fit the version of Family Guy they already had in their heads. The hoax worked because the show had spent 15 years building exactly the kind of reputation that made the hoax believable. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Boston clip is the cleanest example of this pattern, but it is far from the only one. Fans had been collecting moments from the show that seemed to predict real-world events for years before the marathon bombing. After the bombing, the collection grew. Every weird coincidence got cataloged. Every uncomfortable line of dialogue from an old episode got pulled out and shared as new evidence. The Boston hoax was the door that opened the entire prediction conspiracy, and once that door was open, every other strange moment in the show's history started getting pulled through it. One of those moments, a throwaway line from a season 4 episode about a baby running through a shopping mall screaming about an actor named Kevin, would become the strangest of all of them, 12 years after the joke first aired. Section 4. The Kevin Spacey Joke and Every Other Prediction That Wasn't. The episode is called Don't Make Me Over. It is the 4th episode of the 4th season of Family Guy. It aired on May 8th, 2005. The plot of the episode is about Meg getting a makeover, becoming briefly popular, and the family forming a band together to ride her sudden fame. Most of the episode is built around Meg. The Stewie scene at the center of the conspiracy is barely connected to the main story and lasts about 15 seconds total. In the scene, Stewie and Brian are at a shopping mall together. They get separated. Stewie, in classic Stewie fashion, decides to bet himself on doing something stupid for the sake of doing something stupid. The next shot is of a naked Stewie running across the food court of the mall, screaming for help, telling the people in the mall that he has just escaped from Kevin Spacey's basement. The line is delivered, the joke lands, the scene cuts away, and the episode moves on. The joke uses Spacey because Spacey was a famous actor at the time, the kind of name a writer's room could drop into a punchline with the assumption that the audience would recognize it. There is no setup, there is no payoff. The joke is the whole bit. The episode aired in 2005. For 12 years, almost nobody thought about it. In October of 2017, the actor Anthony Rapp, gave an interview to BuzzFeed News in which he accused Kevin Spacey of making sexual advances toward him in 1986 when Rapp was 14 years old. The interview triggered a wave of additional accusations against Spacey from other men, some of whom had worked with him on the Netflix series House of Cards, some of whom had encountered him at the Old Vic Theatre in London, where he had served as artistic director for years, and some of whom had crossed paths with him at industry events going back decades. By the end of 2017, Spacey had been removed from House of Cards, cut out of the finished film All the Money in the World, and replaced with another actor in reshoots, and had effectively ended his career. The breakdown was one of the fastest and most complete fall from grace stories of that whole news cycle. Within hours of Rapp's accusation going public, somebody on the internet remembered the Stewie line. The clip from Don't Make Me Over started circulating again. The line about Stewie escaping from Kevin Spacey's basement, which had been a throwaway joke for 12 years, was now suddenly being shared as evidence that the writers of Family Guy had known something about Spacey that the public had not. Seth MacFarlane gave the strangest possible response to this when he was asked about it. The strange thing about his response was that he said it had not been his joke. He had not written it. He had not even fully understood it when it was pitched to him in the writer's room. He told a reporter at a Fox press tour event in early 2018 that he remembered the joke being suggested by other writers, and that it was a rumor he himself had not heard of before that meeting. The other writers had to explain to him what they were referencing. He did not push back on the joke, and it ended up in the episode, but he was clear that he had not invented the punchline. The man who did know what was being referenced was Alex Sulkin, the showrunner of Family Guy at the time of the joke. Sulkin gave a more detailed version of the story. He said the line had been pitched because of a specific incident involving Spacey that had happened in London in 2004, the year before the episode was written. Spacey had been mugged in a park in London late at night. He told the police one version of the story at first, in which he had been attacked by a young man. Then, days later, he changed his story and said that he had tripped over his dog while chasing the same young man. The shifting account had raised eyebrows in the press at the time. Why was a famous actor in his mid-40s walking his dog through a London park late at night? Why had the story changed? What had really happened? The Hollywood Whisper Network, which is the informal grapevine through which actors, writers, agents, and producers talk to each other about people in the industry without putting anything in writing, had its own answer. The Whisper Network had been carrying rumors about Spacey for years before the London mugging story. Those rumors were specific. The rumors were about young men. The rumors were about behavior that the people who carried them found alarming but had no way of proving. When the London story broke and the details did not add up, the writers who were paying attention thought they understood what had really happened that night. The Family Guy writers' room was full of people who paid attention to that level of industry gossip. So when a joke landed in the room about Stewie running through a mall screaming about a basement, somebody made the connection. Somebody else laughed, and the line went into the script. It was not foresight. It was not prediction. It was a joke based on a rumor that the people in the room thought everyone in their social circle had heard. They were wrong about that part. The rumor had not actually traveled as far as they thought it had. Most of the audience watching at home had no idea what the line was supposed to be referencing. The joke worked as a generic, absurd punchline, with Spacey's name as a random, famous person placeholder. 12 years later, when the rumor finally became public knowledge, the joke retroactively transformed into something that looked like prophecy. It was the same joke, the same words, the same 15 seconds of animation. Nothing had changed about the clip. What changed was the audience's ability to read it. The line had always meant what it meant. The world had finally caught up. That is the boring answer to the Spacey joke, and it is the right one. The interesting question is what other Family Guy moments fit the same pattern, and how many of them have the same boring explanation underneath the spooky surface. The Bruce Jenner cutaways are the next most famous example. Across multiple episodes in the mid-2000s, the show made jokes that depicted Jenner as feminine, as transitioning, as a woman. In a season 7 episode called We Love You, Conrad, from 2009, Stewie sees Brody Jenner on television and refuses to believe that Brody could have come out of a man, insisting that Bruce Jenner is an elegant Dutch woman. In a later episode called Lottery Fever, Bruce Jenner is depicted as a flamboyant cheerleader. When Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out as a transgender woman in 2015, fans dug up the old cutaways and presented them as another prediction. The boring explanation here is just as boring as the Spacey one. Bruce Jenner had been the subject of tabloid rumors and gossip page speculation for years before the public announcement. The rumors had circulated since at least the early 2000s. Magazines had run pieces speculating about facial features, about styling choices, about appearances at events. The Family Guy writers' room, like the rest of the entertainment industry, had been hearing these rumors for a long time. Making jokes about them was simply taking gossip and putting it on screen. The fact that the gossip turned out to be accurate did not require any supernatural foresight. It required only a willingness to make jokes that other shows considered too rude. There's a third pattern that fans cite, which involves former President Donald Trump. The show had used Trump as a recurring punchline for years before he ran for office, depicting him as president in cutaways, joking about him buying things, joking about his hair, treating him as a cartoon caricature of wealth and ego. When Trump won the presidential election in 2016, fans pointed at the old cutaways as proof that the show had seen it coming. The reality is that Trump had been threatening to run for president for decades. He had openly considered running in 1988, in 2000, and in 2012. He was a recurring fixture in tabloid culture. Treating him as a fictional president was the kind of joke any writer's room could make, because the joke had been sitting there for the better part of 30 years. Family Guy was not predicting anything. The show was just one of many that used Trump as a comedy reference point, and it happened to be on the air when his actual presidency began. The Robin Williams coincidence is harder to explain away, but it is also smaller than people think. There is a season 11 episode called Roads to Vegas from 2013, in which Stewie and Brian travel to Las Vegas and end up split into two parallel versions of themselves. One version of the story includes a brief Robin Williams cameo. The episode itself does not focus on suicide. The strangeness comes from a piece of broadcast scheduling. The British network, BBC Three, was airing a rerun of the episode on the evening of August 11th, 2014, the same day Williams died by suicide. The episode happened to finish airing within hours of the news breaking. The BBC apologized for the timing. Family Guy was not the only show to have an awkward scheduling overlap with the Williams news that week. Multiple programs had to reschedule for the same reason. The coincidence was uncomfortable, but it was not prophetic. The show had not predicted anything about Williams. A scheduler at a network in another country had simply not had time to swap out the rerun before the news cycle caught up. There are smaller examples at the Prediction Hunters site, and most of them dissolve as soon as you look at the actual episodes. There is a moment in a season 6 episode called Meet the Quagmires from 2007, where the character Death tells Peter that the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia has been shot in a hunting accident by Vice President Dick Cheney. Fans connect this to Scalia's death in 2016 and to a real-life hunting accident in 2006 in which Cheney shot a friend named Harry Whittington. The joke in the episode was just a topical reference to the Cheney hunting accident, which had happened the year before the episode aired. Scalia was used because he was a recognizable Supreme Court name. The episode did not predict anything. Scalia died of natural causes 9 years after the episode aired, in his sleep, while on a hunting trip, but not while being shot at by anyone. The connection is invented after the fact. What ties all of these examples together is the same psychological mechanism that powered the Boston Marathon hoax. People want shows to be more than they are. People want patterns. The human mind is built to find faces in clouds and predictions in old jokes. When a show has been on the air for more than 400 episodes, the volume of jokes the show has produced is so enormous that some of those jokes will, by sheer statistical inevitability, line up with future events in ways that look uncanny. The math works against the show even if the writers are doing nothing unusual. With enough jokes about famous people, some of those famous people will eventually get into trouble. With enough cutaways about disasters, some of those disasters will eventually happen. The show is not psychic. The show is just very large. Seth MacFarlane, when he is asked about this, has been consistent in his answer for years. He has said the idea of Family Guy as some kind of magical 8-ball that can see the future is silly. He has said the show is not a Ouija board. He has said that the perception of the show as prophetic has been built up by other people, not by him or by the writers, and that the perception serves a story those people want to tell more than it reflects anything real about how the show is made. The thing the conspiracy crowd often misses is that the writer's room is not magical, but it is plugged in. The people who write Family Guy are professional comedy writers in Los Angeles, with industry contacts, gossip networks, and cultural antenna. They hear things before the public hears them. They know which actors are quietly creepy. They know which marriages are quietly falling apart. They know which celebrities are quietly transitioning. They know which politicians are quietly preparing to run for things. The information they work with is not secret in their world. It is their daily air. Putting that information into jokes is just their job. When the information later goes public, the jokes look like prophecy because the public is encountering things the writers have been working with for years. That gap between what the entertainment industry knows and what the audience knows is the entire engine of the prediction conspiracy. Family Guy did not see the future. Family Guy was just slightly slightly ahead of the news cycle, on subjects where being ahead of the news cycle was not particularly difficult. The Spacey joke remains the most striking single example, partly because the gap between the joke airing and the rumor becoming public was so unusually long. 12 years is a long time for a punchline to sit on a shelf before the rest of the world catches up to it. By the time the joke was rediscovered in 2017, the original episode was old enough to drink. Most people who watched Don't Make Me Over when it first aired had forgotten about the line entirely. Bringing it back into circulation required somebody to comb through old episodes specifically looking for moments that might apply. That activity, the combing through old episodes for hidden meaning, has now become its own subculture. There are fan accounts dedicated to finding new examples. There are videos with millions of views compiling the so-called predictions. There are think pieces, both serious and joking, asking whether the show is genuinely psychic. The activity is harmless on its own. The problem is that the same activity, when applied to subjects more dangerous than Hollywood gossip, becomes the kind of misinformation engine that produced the Boston Marathon hoax. The line between fun pattern recognition and actual conspiracy thinking is a thin one, and Family Guy has spent 25 years sitting right on top of it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 2 episodes earn the show a different kind of reputation, one that has nothing to do with predictions and everything to do with what the network allowed to actually air. 2 episodes were considered too dangerous to broadcast at all by Fox itself, and one of them has never aired on American television to this day. Section 5. The Banned Episodes. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein and Partial Terms of Endearment. Family Guy has spent its entire run testing how far a network will let it go. Most of the time, the network has let it go pretty far. The show has made jokes about almost every taboo subject in American culture, including death, disease, race, religion, sex, child abuse, and historical tragedy. And Fox has, with very few exceptions, allowed those jokes to air. The exceptions matter precisely because they are so rare. There are 2 episodes in the show's entire history that Fox has refused to broadcast in their original form. One was held off the network for 4 years before finally being allowed on. The other has never been broadcast on American television at all. And as of today, 16 years after it was finished, it still has not aired on Fox. The first banned episode is from season 3. It is called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. It was the 50th episode the show had produced, the final episode of season 3, and it was supposed to air in 2000. The plot of the episode is about Peter falling for a financial scam involving volcano insurance, losing the family's emergency money, and deciding that the only way to get the money back is to find a Jewish person to handle his finances for him. He believes the stereotype that Jewish people are inherently better with money. He prays for a Jewish accountant to appear, and one does. A man named Max Weinstein, voiced by the actor Ben Stein, breaks down outside the Griffin home and asks to use the phone. Peter takes this as a sign from above. With Max's help, Peter recovers the money. Then, Peter, taking the wrong lesson from his success, decides that his son Chris will only become smart and successful if he is converted to Judaism. He tries to drag Chris to Las Vegas for a quickie bar mitzvah. Lois finds out, races to stop the ceremony, and the episode ends with the family being chased out of the synagogue by angry Jewish congregants and then attacked by a busload of nuns who are angry that Peter strayed from Catholicism. The episode, taken as a whole, is built around the idea that all of these religious stereotypes are silly and that the people holding them are the problem. Peter is the joke. The bigotry is the joke. The Jewish characters are presented as normal, intelligent people who are baffled by Peter's behavior. The conversation about Judaism, by the standards of Family Guy, is actually pretty respectful. The script keeps siding with Lois, who keeps telling Peter that success is not about religion and that he is being ridiculous. Fox did not see it that way. The network looked at the script, looked at the song that Peter sings while praying for a Jewish accountant, and decided the episode was a public relations risk. The song is called I Need a Jew. It is sung by Peter while he stares up at the night sky in a pose that copies the famous Pinocchio scene of Geppetto wishing on a star. The melody of the song borrows heavily from the song When You Wish Upon a Star, the Disney classic from 1940. The lyrics include lines like, even though they killed my lord, I need a Jew. The song is the most aggressive part of the episode by a wide margin. And even though the rest of the episode is built to mock the stereotypes the song uses, the song, on its own, pulled out of context, looked exactly like the kind of thing that could get the network in trouble. Fox decided not to air it. The official reason given was concern that audiences might interpret the episode as anti-Semitic if they did not watch the entire thing in context. The episode's sat on a shelf at the studio for 3 years, while the show itself got canceled twice and started its long, strange journey back from the dead. In 2003, the episode finally aired for the first time, but not on Fox. It aired on Adult Swim on November 9th of that year as part of the rerun deal that had brought the show back into circulation. The Adult Swim broadcast was the first time most American viewers had seen it. By the time it aired, the show had been off the network for over a year. The rumors about a possible revival were already in motion, and the episode was being treated less as a banned episode and more as a kind of curiosity. Then, on December 10th, 2004, more than 4 years after it had been originally produced and after the show had officially been brought back from cancellation, Fox finally aired the episode in its original American time slot. The story did not end there. In 2007, the publishing company that owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star, a firm called Bourne Co., sued the show. The lawsuit named 20th Century Fox, Cartoon Network, Fuzzy Door Productions, Seth MacFarlane personally, and the composer Walter Murphy as defendants. Bourne argued that the song I Need a Jew was a thinly disguised copy of When You Wish Upon a Star, with new offensive lyrics added on top of the original melody, and that the use of their song without permission and in this context damaged the value of the original. They asked the court to stop further distribution of the episode and demanded financial damages. The lawsuit took 2 years to work its way through the federal court system. Both sides filed motions for what is called summary judgment, which is when a judge decides a case without sending it to a jury, on the grounds that the facts are clear enough that no trial is needed. On March 16, 2009, Judge Deborah Batts of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York issued her ruling. She found in favor of the show. She ruled that I Need a Jew was a parody, not a copy, and that parody is protected by the fair use doctrine in American copyright law. The reasoning in her ruling is the part that is worth slowing down for. The judge accepted the argument made by Family Guy's lawyers that the song was making fun of 2 specific things. The first was the saccharine, innocent worldview presented in the original Disney song. The second was Walt Disney himself, who was widely understood to have held anti-Semitic views during his lifetime. The judge accepted that the visual sequence accompanying I Need a Jew was clearly designed to remind viewers of the Pinocchio scene that the original song came from. The Pinocchio reference was not subtle, and it was not accidental. It was the entire point. Pulling Disney's song into a sequence about Jewish stereotypes was deliberately designed to make a comment about Disney as a person, not just about the song as a piece of music. Even more interesting, the judge accepted as evidence the fact that Family Guy had previously, in earlier episodes, depicted Walt Disney as an anti-Semite. The show had a documented track record in its own canon of taking the position that Disney had been a bigot. That track record meant that the I Need a Jew sequence could not be dismissed as random shock value. It was part of a larger argument the show had been making about Disney for years. The earlier episodes provided the context the judge needed to confirm that the parody was intentional and pointed. The show won the case on summary judgment, the lawsuit was dismissed, and Bourne Co. was left with no damages. That was the closest a single Family Guy episode has ever come to ending the show outright. If the lawsuit had succeeded, every distributor of the song would have been forced to pull the episode. The financial damages could have run into the millions, and the precedent would have made it harder for any animated show to use parody music for the rest of the medium's history. Family Guy survived because of a fair use ruling. The episode that the network had originally banned ended up being the episode that secured a piece of legal protection that helped every cartoon writer who came after. The second banned episode is the one that has never gotten that kind of resolution. It is called Partial Terms of Endearment. It was the 21st and final episode of Season 8, produced in 2010, and it has never aired on Fox. It has never aired on Adult Swim. It is not on Hulu. It is not on Disney+. It exists in the United States only on a special standalone DVD release that came packaged with a few other bonus features. 16 years after its production, it remains the only episode of the show that American television has refused to broadcast in any form. The plot of the episode is about Lois agreeing to be a surrogate mother for an old college friend named Naomi and her husband Dale. Lois undergoes the medical procedure, becomes pregnant, and is carrying the couple's biological child. Then the biological parents are killed in a car accident. Lois is left pregnant with a baby that no longer has parents to deliver it to. She has to decide whether to carry the pregnancy to term and put the baby up for adoption, or to terminate the pregnancy. The episode follows her struggle with the decision, while Peter is briefly recruited by anti-abortion activists activists and starts campaigning for Lois to keep the baby before changing his mind again, before changing his mind once more. By the end of the episode, Lois decides to have an abortion. The show treats the decision seriously. The episode ends with the procedure happening off-screen. This is, by a wide margin, the most direct engagement with the abortion debate that Family Guy has ever attempted. The show takes a position. The position is that the decision belongs to Lois, that Peter's interference is foolish, and that the activists trying to push her toward one outcome are being manipulative. The script also contains a few of the most direct anti-abortion position arguments that the show has ever put in the mouth of a character, given to Peter for him to be wrong about. There is a moment in the episode where Brian asks Peter what should happen if a pregnant woman has been raped, and Peter answers that maybe she should have thought of that before she asked him for directions. The line is meant to make Peter look monstrous, and it does, but it is also a line that, on its own, in a clip taken out of context, looks like the show is endorsing a horrific viewpoint. The episode was first announced at the San Diego Comic Convention in July of 2009, almost a year before it was scheduled to air. The Family Guy team showed clips, talked about the script, and confirmed that the episode would close out Season 8. Within days of the panel, Fox issued a statement saying that the network would not be airing the episode. The statement was unusually direct. Fox said it fully supported the producer's right to make the episode and to distribute it however they wanted, but that the network itself would not be broadcasting it. That language is unusual for a Fox statement about its own programming. The network was effectively saying that it was not censoring the episode. It was saying that the producers were free to do what they wanted with it. It was just that the network would not put it on the air. The distinction matters because it preserved the show's creative freedom while protecting the network from any backlash. If anyone wanted to be angry about the episode, the anger could be directed at the producers and the distributors, not at Fox. What happened next is the part of the story that does not fit any normal pattern. The producers expected that the episode would eventually air on Adult Swim, the way When You Wish Upon a Weinstein had aired on Adult Swim 7 years earlier. Adult Swim refused. The cable channel that had once been the home of every banned and uncomfortable Family Guy episode declined to broadcast Partial Terms of Endearment. No clear public reason was ever given. The episode was simply too hot to handle for a programming block that had built its entire reputation on handling things that the broadcast networks would not. The episode did air, but only outside the United States. The British network BBC 3 broadcast it on June 20th, 2010, in its normal Family Guy time slot of 10:30 at night. The British broadcast went off without any major incident. About 1 million British viewers watched the premiere. The episode was generally well received by British critics. Some salon writers in the United States noted, with a kind of frustrated admiration, that Family Guy had managed to engage with the abortion question in a way that more respectable American shows had been afraid to attempt. The American DVD release came out on September 28th, 2010. The episode was sold on a single disc, along with a separate Seth and Alex live comedy show. The disc has been out of print at various points. It has been repressed sporadically. It has occasionally been available for digital purchase on Amazon for around $10. Most fans of the show have never seen it. Most fans of the show do not know it exists. When Disney bought 20th Century Fox in 2019, the new corporate parent did not put Partial Terms of Endearment on the streaming service. When the Star tier of Disney Plus launched internationally and started carrying every episode of Family Guy, Partial Terms of Endearment was specifically left off the service. Disney has, in its own quiet way, continued the ban. The decision to not air either of these episodes raises a question that has never been fully answered. Family Guy has aired episodes that joked about the September 11th attacks, while families of victims were still grieving. The show has aired episodes that joked about the Holocaust. The show has aired episodes that joked about pedophilia, child abuse, slavery, the Kennedy assassination, and dozens of other topics that should, by any reasonable standard, be considered more sensitive than a song about needing a Jewish accountant or an episode about a pregnant woman making a difficult choice. The fact that the network drew its line at these two specific episodes, and not at any of the others, suggests that the network's calculation was not really about offensiveness. It was about which advertisers would refuse to buy commercial time, which religious organizations would call for boycotts, which political groups would write to Congress. The line between what the show is allowed to do and what the show is not allowed to do has very little to do with what is actually offensive. It has everything to do with which kind of offense produces the most expensive blowback. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That logic, the logic of corporate caution rather than moral reasoning, is the same logic that would later govern the most shocking creative decision the show ever made. In 2013, the writer's room decided to kill one of the 4 main characters of the series. The decision triggered the largest fan backlash in the show's history, and the way the show handled the response told the audience something about how the producers actually actually felt about their own work that no banned episode ever could. Section 6. Killing Brian, the stunt that backfired and the petition that brought him back. The episode aired on November 24th, 2013. It was the 6th episode of season 12. It was called Life of Brian. The title is a play on the Monty Python film of the same name, which by itself is the kind of small detail that suggests the writer's room knew exactly what kind of cultural moment they were trying to manufacture. The first act of the episode is built around a time travel adventure. Stewie and Brian are on the run from a band of hostile Native Americans who, because of an earlier time travel mistake involving guns being given to them in the wrong century, now control most of America. They escape, fix the timeline, and Stewie decides he is finished with the time machine. He has gotten tired of every adventure ending in disaster. He destroys the machine, smashes the return pad, and announces that he and Brian are going to live normal lives from now on. The second act is shorter and stranger. Brian and Stewie set up a hockey net in the street to play a game of street hockey. Stewie realizes he has forgotten his knee pads and runs into the house to grab them. Brian stays in the street, fixing the net. A car comes around the corner. The driver does not see Brian. The car hits him. The animation in this scene is unusually direct. Family Guy normally cartoonifies its violence. Characters get hurt and bounce back. Cartoon physics apply. Limbs fall off and get put back on. The street hockey accident is animated differently. The hit is hard. Brian is thrown across the road. There is blood. The camera lingers. Stewie comes out of the house holding his knee pads, sees what has happened, and screams. The next scene is in the hospital. Brian is on a table. The whole family is around him. He is conscious, but barely. He tells them he loves them. Each of them, including Meg, who almost never gets a tender moment in the entire run of the show, says something back to him. Stewie is the last to speak. He cannot get the words out. Brian dies on the table. The camera holds on Stewie's face as he tries to understand what just happened. The funeral happens in the next scene. Brian is buried. The Griffin family stands around the grave. Stewie tries to use what is left of the time machine to go back and save Brian, but he discovers that his parts dealer has been killed for accidentally drawing a religious figure. There is no way to fix the machine. There is no way to bring Brian back. The episode ends a month later. The family is still grieving. Lois decides they need a new dog. Peter goes to the pet store and comes back with a smooth-talking Italian-American dog named Vinny, voiced by the actor Tony Sirico, who was famous at the time for playing Polly Walnuts on The Sopranos. The episode closes on Vinny going to sleep next to Stewie's bed, having accepted his place in the family. The credits rolled. 8 million people had watched it live. The internet caught fire within the hour. The reaction was unlike anything the show had triggered before. Family Guy had spent a decade and a half doing things on television that other shows would not do. The show had killed off characters before, including in some pretty shocking ways. The show had never killed a member of the Central Four. Brian was not a recurring character. Brian was Brian. He was on the opening credits. He was the second voice in the room in almost every scene. He had, over 14 years, become the emotional anchor of the show. He drank with Peter. He talked Stewie through his crises. He delivered most of the show's actually serious lines. Killing him felt like killing the show itself. A petition appeared online within hours of the episode airing. The petition demanded that Brian be brought back. It collected more than 128,000 signatures within a few days. The petition was addressed directly to Seth MacFarlane and to Fox Broadcasting. The signatures kept coming. By the end of the week, the petition had become a news story in its own right. Major outlets like Rolling Stone, The Guardian, and the AV Club were running pieces about the death and the reaction to it. The death of a cartoon dog was the most covered animation story of the year. The producer's first response was to insist that the death was permanent. Steve Callahan, an executive producer of the show, gave an interview to E! News in which he explained the thinking behind the decision. He said the idea had been pitched in the writer's room and had caught fire. He said the team had decided it would be a fun way to shake things up. He said they had already been excited about how the change would affect the family dynamics and the characters in the next few episodes. He said the other voice actors had been surprised when they heard the news and that they had been glad it was not their character being killed off. He said the decision to introduce Vinny had been made because Seth MacFarlane felt that the family unit needed a dog in it, that losing Brian meant a comedic and interpersonal void, and that the void needed to be filled. He said it had been MacFarlane's specific idea to cast Tony Sirico as the new dog. The whole interview was framed as a creative decision the team was committed to. That framing started falling apart almost immediately. The episode that aired the week after Life of Brian was called Into Harmony's Way. It featured Vinny in a small subplot. The reception was cool. The episode after that was the same. Vinny was charming, and the cast did good work with him, but the audience was not warming up to the idea. The show was operating on a different emotional register than usual. Stewie's grief subplots in the post-death episodes were genuinely affecting. The Vinny scenes were genuinely funny. None of it felt like Family Guy. Inside the production, the calculus changed quickly. The petition kept growing. The press coverage kept escalating. Ratings for the post-death episodes were not collapsing, but the social media attention was overwhelmingly negative. Fans were threatening to stop watching. Fans were claiming the show was over. Fans were posting tributes to Brian on every platform that existed. The producers had wanted a cultural moment, and they had gotten one. And the moment was not turning into the long-term creative reset they had described. It was turning into a public relations problem. 3 episodes after Life of Brian, on December 15th, 2013, the show aired Christmas Guy. The episode is the season's Christmas special. The plot follows Stewie missing Brian during the holidays. He sees a younger version of himself at a Christmas event. He realizes that this past version of himself still has access to a time pad, the same kind of pad that had been destroyed in Life of Brian. Stewie steals the pad from his past self. Vinny, who has spent the last few episodes being a good friend to Stewie, gives him his blessing to use it. Stewie travels back to the day of the accident. He pushes Brian out of the way of the car. The car misses. Brian is alive. The episode ends with the Griffin family going about their Christmas as if nothing had happened. The death is undone. Vinny, who had been a real character with a real backstory and a real relationship with Stewie for 3 episodes, is wiped out of the timeline. He never met the family. He does not exist as a member of the household. He is gone. Brian was dead for 21 days. The speed of the reversal made it impossible to maintain the original story about creative ambition. The show had killed Brian as a serious creative decision and brought him back as a panic move. Or the show had killed Brian as a stunt and brought him back as the second half of the same stunt, with the death and the resurrection always planned to be the package. Both readings are available. The producers eventually settled on a version of the second one, in which the whole thing had been deliberate from the start, and the surprise of the resurrection had always been part of the plan. Seth MacFarlane himself, in later interviews, leaned into this framing. He said the death had always been temporary. He said the team had wanted to shake the audience, and to demonstrate how much Brian mattered to the show's chemistry. That version of the story has problems. Steve Callahan's original interview from November was very specific about how the team had been planning to develop the next several episodes around the new dynamic. The post-death episodes were not designed to feel like a brief detour. They were designed to feel like a new direction. Vinny's character had been written as a permanent addition. Tony Sirico was cast for what looked like a long-term arc. The decision to undo the death so quickly came after the petition, after the ratings noise, after the press cycle had turned. The producers can describe the timeline however they like in retrospect. The actual timeline tells a different story. There is one quieter detail from this period that the producers have never really explained. Vinny was not just removed from the timeline, he was specifically removed in a way that erased his entire emotional contribution. In Christmas Guy, Vinny's last act is to encourage Stewie to save Brian. He gives Stewie his blessing to undo Vinny's own existence. He sacrifices himself, knowingly, so that Brian can come back. It is the kind of moment a show puts at the end of a much longer arc after a character has earned that level of dignity over many seasons. Vinny earned it in 3 episodes. He gave Stewie permission to erase him. Then he was gone. Vinny did get a small return appearance later in season 15 in an episode called The Boys in the Band, where he replaced Brian in a children's band that Stewie was running. The appearance was brief and was treated as a kind of bonus for the fans who had liked him. It did not undo the erasure. It just acknowledged that the character had existed, somewhere, in some version of the timeline. The bigger question that the death and resurrection raised was about Family Guy's relationship to its own consequences. The show had spent its entire run pretending that nothing was permanent. Cutaway gags ended and were forgotten. Characters did terrible things and faced no consequences. Continuity was loose by design. The death of Brian was, briefly, a violation of all of that. For 3 episodes, Family Guy was a show where actions had weight. A character could die and stay dead. The grief was real. The replacement could not fully replace the lost friend. Then the show used a time machine to take all of it back. And in taking it back, it told the audience something about itself that the audience had been suspecting for a while. The show was not actually willing to be different. It was willing to pretend for short stretches, and the pretending was always going to end. The status quo would always come back. A piece in the AV Club at the time, written by Eric Thurm, gave Life of Brian a high grade and noted that the death scene was actually pretty poignant for what the show was capable of. He wrote that the episode came as close as Family Guy could get to being genuinely moving, and that the handling of the sudden death of a main character was surprisingly effective. He was, by the standards of the show, paying it a a real compliment. Other critics were less kind. The website Looper, years later, wrote a piece arguing that Family Guy should never have brought Brian back. Their argument was that the show had a chance, briefly, to actually be different, to actually carry the weight of a permanent change, and that by undoing the death, the show had thrown away its only real opportunity for creative growth in a decade. They argued that Vinny had been a more interesting character than late-period Brian, and that keeping Vinny, while letting Brian go, would have forced the show to become something new. Bringing Brian back, in their reading, was the moment Family Guy publicly admitted that it would never take a real risk again. Most fans did not see it that way at the time. Most fans were just relieved. The petition signers got what they asked for. The ratings for Christmas Guy were strong. The internet calmed down. The show kept going. Brian came back into the opening credits, came back into the show's rhythms, came back into his usual seat at the kitchen table. Within a few episodes, it was as if the whole thing had never happened. It is worth noticing that Brian, after coming back, was never quite the same character. The post-resurrection Brian is somehow louder, somehow sloppier, somehow more openly written as the alcoholic failed novelist that the late seasons would lean into. The grace and warmth that Brian had occasionally shown in earlier seasons started showing up less often. He became more of a punchline and less of a person. Some fans have argued that this was a deliberate creative shift. Others have argued that the writers' room had simply lost interest in the character after seeing how easily the audience would forgive his death. There is no clean answer. What is clear is that the Brian who died in Life of Brian and the Brian who came back in Christmas Guy were, in some quiet way, two slightly different dogs. The audience accepted the resurrection. The show moved on. The moment of difference between them, the gap of 3 episodes when the family had a different dog, became one of those small, quiet wounds that the show kept open. Vinny existed. Vinny mattered. Vinny was erased. Some part of the audience never quite let that go. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Brian's death, even in being undone, opened a question that the show has spent the last decade quietly working through. If the family can lose a member and have it taken back by a time machine, what does it mean that the family is still standing? What is real about any of these characters? The answer that some fans came up with did not stay confined to Brian. It extended to the entire premise of the show. The most famous fan theory in Family Guy history holds that none of the family is actually alive at all, that the entire program is happening inside the broken mind of one specific character, and that the deaths and resurrections that the show treats as cartoon physics are echoes of something much darker that happened off-screen before the show ever began. Section 7. The Peter is going insane theory. The fan theory that became a creepypasta. The post went up on Reddit on August 7th, 2012. The author was a user named B-blank0308. The subreddit was called Fan Theories, a small corner of the site where people gathered to argue about hidden meanings in their favorite movies and television shows. The post was about Family Guy. It was not long. It got around 540 upvotes over the next 10 years, which by Reddit standards is decent but not viral. For a long time, the theory just sat there, quietly, on a thread most of the internet had never seen. In late 2022, something changed. The post started circulating on TikTok. Users would film themselves daring other users to look the theory up. The captions would warn that what they were about to read would ruin Family Guy forever. The videos would cut away just before the reveal, telling the viewer to find the post for themselves. Millions of people did. The theory has its own entry on the website Know Your Meme. It has been written about by major outlets covering the Family Guy fan community. It is now, more than a decade after the original post, the single most famous fan theory the show has ever produced. The theory is grim, worth being said up front because there is no graceful way to walk into it. The theory begins with a car ride home from a school party. Meg is driving. She has been drinking. Chris is in the passenger seat. Lois is in the back seat, pregnant with her 4th child, who in this version of events would have been Stewie. Meg loses control of the car. The crash kills Chris instantly. Meg also dies. Lois survives the crash but loses the baby. According to the theory, she is so destroyed by the loss of 2 children and the unborn child that she kills herself shortly after. Peter Griffin is the only one left. In the theory's version of events, Peter is not actually the man the show presents. The real Peter is intelligent. He is articulate. He is competent. He has spent his life being a good husband and a present father. The crash takes everything from him in a single night. His wife, 2 of his children, the baby that had not yet been born. He has nothing. He has nobody to come home to. He has nothing to do. He breaks. The breaking is not loud. He just stops being able to function. He ends up institutionalized. The theory specifies that that Peter is admitted to a psychiatric hospital where he spends the rest of his life. The version of reality the audience watches as Family Guy is what he constructs in his head to keep himself from facing what actually happened. Every member of the family the show depicts is, in the theory, an answer to a piece of grief that Peter cannot carry. Meg is treated badly by everyone in the show because Peter cannot forgive her for being the one who was driving. He loved her in real life. He resents her now. The version of Meg in his head exists to be the recipient of the blame he cannot let go of. Every cruel joke the family makes at Meg's expense is Peter punishing his daughter for the accident, in the only place he is still allowed to punish her. Chris is dim and sweet because that is how Peter chooses to remember him. Children who die young get frozen in the memory of the people who loved them. Peter remembers Chris as a kind, slow-moving boy who never quite grew up. The Chris of the show is what Peter wishes he had paid more attention to while the real Chris was still alive. Stewie is the strangest piece. The theory holds that Stewie represents the unborn child Lois was carrying when she died. Peter never met him. He could not picture what kind of person the baby would have grown into, so he imagines, in the most loving way a grieving father can, that his lost son would have been brilliant, a genius, capable of anything. He gives Stewie an English accent because the accent feels intelligent to him. He gives Stewie a desire to kill Lois because somewhere, deep in his head, Peter still blames Lois for the loss of the baby. Lois died and took the baby with her. The Stewie in his head wants to hurt the woman who hurt Stewie first. Lois herself is in his head as the version of her he wants to argue with. She is alive there. She corrects him. She nags him. She is the steady voice he lost when she actually died. He keeps her present because letting her go would mean accepting that she is gone. Brian is the version of Peter that the real Peter believes he should have been. The theory argues that the real Peter, before the crash, was the smart one, the intellectual, the one who read books and held opinions and engaged with the world. After the crash, he cannot bear to be that person anymore. He wears the body and the mind of the dim version of himself, the version with the lower standards and the smaller world. The real intelligence he used to have gets exiled into the dog. Brian is the part of Peter that is still able to think clearly. Brian is also alone. Brian also drinks too much. Brian also feels purposeless. The dog is Peter's best self, locked outside the family, sitting at a typewriter, trying to write a novel that will never be finished. The theory has answers for the supporting characters, too. Cleveland and Quagmire, in this version of the story, are real men. They were Peter's actual neighbors before the crash. They visit him at the hospital. The two of them showing up in the show represents the times they sit with him in the visiting room, listening to him talk about his made-up life, going along with the fantasy because they do not know what else to do. Cleveland eventually finds it too hard to keep visiting. He stops coming. The theory argues that this is when Peter creates the Cleveland show in his head, a separate fantasy where his old friend is still nearby, still part of his life, still safe. Joe Swanson, the police officer in the wheelchair, is in the theory a man Peter never actually met. The story holds that Cleveland and Quagmire told Peter about a new neighbor they had, a man named Joe, who was a strong father, who had a son and a baby on the way. Peter, having lost his own children, fixated on the description. He invented a friendship with Joe in his head. He gave Joe a wheelchair because, even in fantasy, Peter could not let his imagined friend be a fully able-bodied father. Some part of him needed Joe to be a little bit broken too, so the friendship would feel earned. The babies in the show, Joe's son and Susie Swanson, exist as the children Peter wishes he could see grow up. The theory is, as a piece of writing, deeply effective. It is also completely speculative. There is nothing in any episode of Family Guy that confirms it. Seth MacFarlane has never validated it. The writer's room has never used it as a story arc. It is purely a reading. The post explicitly admits it is a reading. The user who wrote it presented it as a sad way to look at the show, not as a hidden truth they had decoded. What makes the theory powerful is how cleanly the explanation maps onto the show's actual content. Meg really is mistreated. Chris really is sweet and slow. Stewie really does talk like a tiny adult and really does want Lois dead. Brian really is the smart one of the household and really is alone in a way the others are not. Cleveland really did leave for his own show. Joe really is in a wheelchair. Once the theory has been planted in your head, every episode you watch starts looking like evidence for it. The mind keeps finding the pattern, even when the pattern was never put there. This is why the theory took off on TikTok 10 years after it was first posted. The platform is built for moments where a viewer feels the floor shift under them. The theory is a floor shifter. People watching Family Guy as a comfort show, as background background noise, as a thing to laugh at. We're suddenly being told that the show might also be the saddest premise on television. The shift from comfort to discomfort is exactly the kind of emotional whiplash short video platforms reward. The theory has been compared, by some online commentators, to the kind of fan theories that have grown up around shows like SpongeBob SquarePants and the Flintstones. There is a long tradition in cartoon fan culture of taking a brightly colored, family-friendly show and arguing that it is secretly about something dark. Most of the time, these theories are silly, and the people writing them know they are silly. The Peter Insane theory is in a different category. It is not silly. It is sad. It is internally consistent. It is built with care. It is also wrong. There is no evidence in any episode that supports it as the actual intent of the writers. There are dozens of episodes that contradict it. Family Guy has shown all of these characters in flashback. Family Guy has shown them existing outside Peter's perception. Family Guy has had episodes where Peter is not present at all. The theory cannot survive a serious reading of the show's full canon. It only works when you focus on the moments that fit. That is the nature of fan theories about long-running shows. The longer a show runs, the more material there is to cherry pick. Family Guy has produced over 400 episodes. Any reading you can imagine, no matter how dark or how strange, can find at least some moments to support it. The Peter Insane theory is the most successful example of this kind of cherry picking the show has ever generated. It is also the most shared piece of Family Guy fan analysis ever made. More people have heard the theory than have watched many of the actual episodes that it pretends to be about. The theory's success raises a question about the audience that Family Guy has built. The theory only works on a viewer who already wants the show to be deeper than it is. The fact that millions of people responded to it, shared it, found it convincing, suggests that part of the fan base has been quietly hoping for years that the show is hiding something. Some part of them does not want Family Guy to be just a comedy. They want it to mean something. The theory gives them permission to read meaning into the show that the show itself does not provide. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The single character who most resists the theory's reading, in the way the show actually presents him, is Stewie. The theory wants Stewie to be a tragic stand-in for a baby Peter never met. The show, on its own terms, has spent 25 years building Stewie into something much stranger than that. He is brilliant, he is violent, he talks like a 30-year-old, he has a teddy bear he keeps secrets with, he has, depending on which episode you trust, been a time traveler, a future dictator, a man pretending to be a baby, and possibly the secret biological son of his own teenage sister. The questions surrounding Stewie are not really about whether he fits a sad fan theory. The questions are about who Stewie actually is in the show's own canon, and the answers the show has given over its run do not line up with each other in any clean way at all. Section 8. The Stewie Theories. Time traveler, reincarnated dictator, mother who is Meg. Stewie Griffin is the most theorized about character in the entire run of Family Guy, and the show itself is largely responsible for that. The writers have spent 25 years giving the audience permission to wonder who he actually is. Every season has added another wrinkle. Every era has contradicted the era before it. The character who in the pilot was a straightforward evil mastermind plotting to kill his mother has, over the course of more than 400 episodes, become the closest thing American animation has to an unsolved puzzle. The fan theories that have grown up around him are not really separate from the show's own canon. They are, in a strange way, what the show keeps hinting at and then refusing to confirm. The first major theory is the reincarnated dictator theory. Anyone watching the early seasons of the show could see why this one took hold. Stewie in the pilot has a doctor finding a map of Europe inside Lois with the capitals marked for bombing. He talks like a colonial-era British general. He plots military campaigns. He builds weapons. He hates his mother, specifically because she is the woman who carried him. Fans started arguing, not entirely as a joke, that this was the behavior of a soul that had already lived a life. The theory holds that Stewie is the reincarnation of someone like Oliver Cromwell, an English military leader from the 1600s who actually ruled England as a dictator after a civil war. The accent fits. The strategic mind fits. The casual willingness to cause violence on a massive scale fits. The theory adds that, as Stewie has grown older across the show's run, he has slowly forgotten his past life, which is why he has softened from the pure villain of the early seasons into the more emotionally complicated character of the later ones. The man he used to be is fading. The baby he actually is now is taking over. The second major theory is the future dictator theory, and this one has the unusual quality of being nearly canon. The 2005 direct-to-DVD DVD movie called Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, later cut up into episodes for television under the title Stewie Be Good, shows a future version of Stewie who has grown up to become a world-conquering tyrant. This adult Stewie is rich, powerful, lonely, and ruthless. He has technology nobody else has. He runs an empire. He has spent his life systematically taking over institutions and bending them to his will. The episode treats this future as an actual possibility for the character. The plot of the movie is that present-day Stewie, after meeting his future self, decides he does not want to become this man. He turns away from world domination and chooses a smaller, less ambitious life. The future is supposedly avoided. The theory among fans is that the future was not really avoided, and that the show has been quietly tracking the early stages of Stewie's transformation into the dictator we already saw he would become. Every time Stewie casually invents impossible technology, the theory says, we are watching the dictator's apprenticeship. The third major theory, and the strangest one, is that Meg is Stewie's biological mother. The theory holds that Meg got pregnant in her early teens. The family helped her cover it up to spare her embarrassment, and Lois agreed to raise the baby as her own. The fan evidence for this is mostly circumstantial. Meg occasionally shows a level of attachment to Stewie that does not match her relationship with the rest of her siblings. Lois, at her cruelest moments, has thrown jabs at Meg about teen pregnancy that feel weirdly specific. The strongest single piece of evidence comes from partial terms of endearment, the abortion episode that Fox refused to air. There is a moment in that episode where Lois says outright that Meg gave birth to Stewie. The line is delivered in the middle of an argument, almost like a throwaway, and Meg does not respond. She does not deny it. She does not act surprised. She just lets the line pass. That single line is the entire foundation of the theory in canon. The line exists in an episode that has never been broadcast on American television. The line could be a joke. The line could be a hint. The show has never returned to it. The fourth major theory is the everything is Stewie's perception theory. The argument here is that the events of Family Guy are not happening the way the audience sees them. They are happening through the eyes of a baby trying to make sense of a household he is too young to understand. Peter looks like an idiot because Stewie experiences him as an unpredictable, overgrown person who breaks things. Lois looks like a nag because that is how an infant experiences a mother who is constantly telling him to stop touching the outlet. Meg looks unloved because Stewie sees the family argue with her more than they argue with anyone else. And from a baby's perspective, the volume of the argument equals the temperature of the relationship. Chris looks dim because, to Stewie, an older brother who cannot have a real conversation with him is, by definition, dim. And Brian, in this theory, does not actually talk. Brian barks and whimpers and makes the noises a normal dog makes. Stewie, in his head, translates those noises into the sophisticated speech of his only friend in the household. The whole show, in this reading, is the inner life of a one-year-old. This theory has a strange piece of evidence going for it. Across the show's run, certain characters can hear Stewie talk and others cannot. Brian always can. Vinny, the replacement dog from the Brian death period, immediately could. The cult leader in an early episode called Chitty Chitty Death Bang understood Stewie perfectly right up until the moment Stewie killed him. Most members of the family cannot hear his actual words, except in episodes that are later revealed to be simulations or dreams. The pattern is not consistent. The show has never explained why some characters can hear him and others cannot. The theory's answer is that nobody can hear him. He is a baby. The hearing is happening only inside his own head. The fifth major theory, and maybe the most disorienting, came directly from the writers themselves in 2018. The episode is called Send In Stewie, Please. It aired without a commercial break, which Family Guy almost never does, and it features a guest performance by the actor Sir Ian McKellen as a child psychiatrist named Dr. Pritchfield. The plot of the episode is that Stewie has been sent to therapy and is sitting alone in a room with the doctor. He talks. He talks for the entire episode. By the end, he reveals two things that the show had hinted at for years and never confirmed. The first reveal is that Stewie's English accent is fake. He puts it on. He has been performing it since he learned to talk. His real voice sounds like a normal American child. He explains that he created the accent because he never felt like he fit in with other kids, and the British voice gave him the way to feel separate, to feel above, to feel like he was the kind of person who deserved to be listened to. The accent is a costume he has been wearing his whole life. Dr. Pritchfield, who happens to actually be British, sees through it immediately. He tells Stewie he sounds like a lonely little boy. Stewie breaks down and admits he is. The second reveal is harder to pin down because the show pulls back from it at the last moment. Stewie nearly comes out as gay. He talks about his confusion. He talks about not knowing what he is. He talks about how his crushes on male celebrities and and his attachment to his teddy bear Rupert have always confused him. Then, before any final declaration, he panics and kills Dr. Pritchfield to keep the secret from leaving the room. The episode is canon, the accent reveal is canon, the man Stewie has presented himself as for nearly 2 decades of television is, by the show's own admission, an act. Showrunner Rich Apple said in a Deadline interview that Seth MacFarlane's position on Stewie's sexuality was that the character is still a baby, that he does not know yet, and that sexuality is fluid enough that the show should leave it open. The official position is that there is no answer. The official position is that Stewie himself does not know. That answer is what makes the character impossible to pin down. The show has spent its entire run leaning into the ambiguity. Stewie has had girlfriends, Stewie has fallen in love with a female toddler in an episode called Damn It, Janet. Stewie has also had romantic fantasies about Brian, has invented an alter ego named Desiree, who has had multiple boyfriends, and has explicitly told other characters that he is probably queer when asked. The character is canonically a young child with no fixed identity, and the show is canonically committed to keeping it that way. The reincarnated dictator, the future tyrant, the secret son of his own sister, the window through which the entire show is being filtered, the American kid faking a British voice, the closeted toddler. All of these readings exist. All of them have evidence in the actual episodes. None of them cancel each other out because the show has never picked a lane. Stewie is, in some ways, the most unstable character on American television. He is also the most carefully maintained instability because the writers have understood from very early on that any final answer would shrink him. A Stewie who is definitely gay loses something.
A Stewie who is definitely a future dictator loses something. A Stewie who is definitely a baby loses everything. The character only works as long as all of the readings remain possible at once. The show has spent 25 years protecting his mystery. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fact that one specific character on the show can shift identity this freely, while another character is held to a much narrower lane, points at something the audience does not always notice. Stewie gets to be many things. Brian is forced to be one thing, over and over, in scene after scene, until even the other characters on the show start saying it out loud. The most brutal speech ever delivered on Family Guy is not aimed at Peter, or Lois, or Meg. It is aimed at the dog. And the man who wrote the speech, and the man who voices the dog, are the same man. Section 9. Brian as Seth's self-insert. The Quagmire speech as public self-loathing. The episode aired on November 22nd, 2009, Season 8, Episode 7. The title is Jerome is the New Black. The setup of the episode is that Cleveland has left Quahog to star in his own spin-off show, and Peter, Joe, and Quagmire are trying to find a new fourth member of their friend group. They settle on a new character named Jerome, voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson. The main plot of the episode is about Peter's jealousy when he discovers Lois used to date Jerome. The B-plot, the smaller story running alongside the main one, is the one that became famous. Brian, hearing that the guys have a new fourth friend, tries to insert himself into the group. He volunteers to be the replacement Cleveland. Peter pulls him aside and tells him it would never work because of the whole Quagmire thing. Brian asks what the Quagmire thing is. Peter tells him, casually, that Quagmire hates him. Brian is shocked. He had never noticed. The next several scenes are Brian trying to fix the situation. He tries to be friendly. He tries to bond. He tries to set up a meeting. None of it works. Quagmire keeps avoiding him. Brian, being Brian, pushes harder. He keeps asking why. He keeps trying to force a friendship into existence. Eventually, he tricks Quagmire into a one-on-one dinner at a restaurant. The two of them sit down across a table from each other. Brian asks the question one more time. He asks Quagmire to just tell him, plainly, why the hatred is there. Quagmire delivers a speech that lasts about 90 seconds. He delivers it without any music underneath. The animation holds steady on his face. The camera does not cut away to reaction shots. The speech is calm. The speech is precise. The speech is one of the most specific, sustained takedowns of a single character in the history of American animation. Quagmire tells Brian that he is the worst person Quagmire knows. He says Brian constantly hits on his best friend's wife, even though that friend has paid for Brian's food and rescued him from certain death. And that Brian repays this kindness by trying to sleep with the man's wife and defecating on the man's lawn. He says Brian is a sponge who never picks up a bill, who is always promising to pay later, with later never coming. He says Brian pretends
pretends to be deep, pretends to love women for their souls, and then dates only beautiful, empty-headed women while handing them a copy of the novel The Catcher in the Rye and lecturing them with a 7th grade interpretation of the book to seem intellectual. He admits that he, Quagmire, also dates women only for their bodies, but says that at least he is honest about it. He says Brian has a textbook liberal worldview that Brian never actually backs up with action. He says Brian thinks driving a Prius makes him a good person. He says Brian believes religion is for idiots and treats every religious person like they are stupid, while doing nothing to help anyone himself. Quagmire mentions that he himself works at a soup kitchen and that he has never seen Brian there. He tells Brian that if he wants to help, he can grab a ladle. He says Brian failed college twice. He says that is not nearly as bad as Brian's failure as a father, and asks how the son Brian never sees is doing. He says he could forgive every one of these flaws if Brian were not, on top of all of them, a bore. He calls Brian a big, sad, alcoholic bore. He stands up. He thanks Brian, sarcastically, for the steak. He leaves the restaurant. The camera holds on Brian, alone at the table, having been told the truth about himself with no defense available. The speech is not a comedy bit in the usual sense. There are no real punchlines. There is no joke at the end. There is just an itemized list of Brian's flaws, delivered by another character, in front of an audience that has been watching Brian for 10 years. The thing that makes this scene strange, the thing that has kept fans talking about it for over 15 years, is who wrote it and who voiced it. Brian Griffin is voiced by Seth MacFarlane. Glenn Quagmire is voiced by Seth MacFarlane. Both characters are speaking with Seth MacFarlane's voice. The takedown is, in the most literal recording booth sense, MacFarlane delivering a list of personal flaws to himself. He went into a sound booth. He sat in front of a microphone. He recorded the speech as Quagmire. He then, presumably in a different session, recorded the silence and the small reactions as Brian. The whole exchange is one man alone in a room telling himself everything that is wrong with him. Brian's voice is also unique in the show because it is the only main character voice that MacFarlane does not modify. He performs Peter with a strangled higher pitch. He performs Stewie with the British accent that the show has now confirmed is fake. He performs Quagmire with a nasal forward register. Brian gets MacFarlane's actual speaking voice, the same voice MacFarlane uses when he gives interviews, accepts awards, hosts the Oscars. There is no character mask between the man and the dog. When you hear Brian, you hear Seth. MacFarlane has said in multiple interviews that Brian is a partial self-stand-in. In a 2004 interview with the Daily Princetonian, the student newspaper of Princeton University, MacFarlane noted that he has some Brian-type issues from time to time, that he is also looking for the right person, and that he dates as much as the next guy. On the radio show Loveline, where he has been a frequent guest, he made similar comments. When asked by KTLA which character he most relates to, he answered easily, Brian. Brian shares his politics. Brian shares his atheism. Brian shares his liberal positions on social issues. Brian, like the show's creator, is a sophisticated white guy who thinks of himself as one of the smarter people in any room, and who has spent his life around comedy writers in Los Angeles. The Quagmire speech, written and recorded by MacFarlane, takes everything Brian shares with MacFarlane and rips it apart. The complaint about pretending to be deep while dating empty women. The complaint about hiding behind The Catcher in the Rye. The complaint about driving a Prius and feeling morally superior about it. The complaint about treating religious people like idiots while doing no actual good in the world. The complaint about being an alcoholic. The complaint about being a failure as a father. Every one of these is a complaint that could be aimed at the public version of Seth MacFarlane that the celebrity press had been building since the early 2000s. The speech reads, on close inspection, like a list of all the things MacFarlane was being criticized for in the years leading up to 2009. The critic Emily Vanderwerf, writing in the AV Club at the time, noticed exactly this. In her review of the episode, she wrote that it is amusing the show was spending so much time tearing down the one character who is most clearly a mouthpiece for the creator. She did not push the observation any further. She did not need to. The implication was sitting on the surface for anyone willing to look at it. The deeper read of this scene, the read that has circulated quietly among the show's more attentive fans for years, is that the speech is a piece of public self-criticism. MacFarlane, in the position of having built a comedy empire on a character who was visibly an extension of himself, used another character he also voices to publicly say all the things about himself that he was not allowed to say directly. Putting the speech in Quagmire's mouth gave him plausible deniability. It is a comedy show. The character
character is a cartoon womanizer with no moral high ground. The audience is supposed to take the takedown with a grain of salt. The takedown is funny, except the takedown is not funny. It does not land like a joke. It lands like an essay being read aloud at the dinner table. There is a quieter piece of evidence that supports this reading. The show, after the Quagmire speech, did not soften Brian. Brian got worse. The post-2009 Brian became more openly pretentious, more openly hypocritical, more openly the kind of character Quagmire had described. The episodes of the show in the years that followed leaned into Brian's flaws, rather than backing away from them. There is an episode in season 8 called Brian and Stewie, in which Brian admits, in a long, quiet conversation with Stewie, that he has accomplished nothing with his life and has been considering ending it. The episode treats this admission seriously. The grief in his voice is real. The character is, by his own account, exactly what Quagmire said he was. If Brian is partly Seth, then the long arc of Brian getting worse and worse over the years is, in some quiet way, the show's creator letting his own self-criticism play out in public. Some critics have pointed out that this is a strange thing for a comedy to be doing. A show that runs for 25 years and uses one of its main characters as a vehicle for the creator's personal failings is a show that is, on some level, working through something its audience may not be fully aware of. The audience laughs at Brian. The man writing Brian is the man being laughed at. The laughter and the self-mockery are the same act. The show has never confirmed any of this. McFarlane has never said, in plain language, that Brian is him. The closest he has come is to say Brian shares some traits with him, that Brian's politics are his politics, that Brian's loneliness is recognizable to him. The rest of the connection has been built by viewers paying attention to the work. There is one more layer to this story that fans of the show have discussed for years. The Quagmire speech, while it is the most famous takedown of Brian, is not the only one. The show has built an entire small subgenre of episodes in which Brian is verbally destroyed by the people around him. He gets dismantled in episodes about his writing career. He gets dismantled in episodes about his romantic life. He gets dismantled in episodes about his politics. The cumulative effect, across hundreds of episodes, is of a character who is being slowly, methodically stripped of dignity in every direction. And the audience cheers. The audience finds it funny. The audience keeps coming back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That cheerful acceptance of seeing a familiar character broken down on a weekly basis points at a larger pattern in how Family Guy has trained its audience to watch it. The show has, over its run, taught the people watching to take none of it seriously. The deaths get undone. The grief gets forgotten. The characters get insulted and come back next week. The whole world of the show operates on an assumption that the rules of fictional consequence do not apply. And that assumption may be the show's deepest hidden truth, the one it has been quietly confirming for decades in moments that the audience usually misses. Section 10. Family Guy, Inside American Dad. Inside Family Guy, the show confirms it isn't real. The strangest theory about Family Guy is the one the show keeps confirming on its own. Not as a single dramatic reveal, not as a season-ending twist, just as a steady drip of small moments scattered across hundreds of episodes that all point at the same idea. The Griffins are not real. Not in the sense that they are cartoons, which is obvious, in the sense that inside the world of the show, the Griffins are also fictional. They are characters in a television show that exists somewhere else. They are aware of being watched. They are aware of being written. The first major piece of evidence is an episode from season 15 called Inside Family Guy. The title is a direct reference to the kind of behind-the-scenes documentary specials that real television networks sometimes air about their long-running shows. The premise is that a documentary crew has been given access to the production of Family Guy, and the audience is being shown how the show actually gets made. The version that gets revealed is strange. The Griffins are not the Griffins. They are actors playing the Griffins. The actor who plays Peter is a sober, articulate, professional man who hates being recognized in public for his role. The actor who plays Brian is a stable, well-adjusted dog without a drinking problem. The actor who plays Stewie is a 20-year-old college student. The whole household, when the cameras stop rolling, is a workplace. Lois has a real life outside the show. Meg has a real career. Chris is taller than Peter and not slow at all. The episode does not explain how to reconcile this with the rest of the show's continuity. The episode does not return to it. The episode airs, suggests that the Griffins are actors, and then the next week the show goes back to acting like the family is a real family living in Quahog, Rhode Island. The viewer is left to decide what to do with the information. The second piece of evidence is an episode from season 10 called Back to the Pilot. The plot
plot is that Stewie and Brian use the time machine to travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy. They land inside the pilot from January 1999. They look around. They notice that the animation looks rougher. They notice that the characters move differently. They make jokes about how cheap everything looks. They comment out loud on the production quality of the early seasons. This is meaningful because it implies the early seasons are a real place that exists somewhere separate from the present-day version of the show. The fan theory that grew out of this episode argues that Stewie and Brian did not actually time travel. They traveled between two different universes. The pre-cancellation show is one universe. The post-cancellation show is another. The Family Guy that aired in 1999 is not the same Family Guy that aired in 2012. They are parallel realities, layered on top of each other, sharing the same family, but with different rules. The Reddit user who first laid out this theory in detail, named Ho-Ho Swacky Quest, pointed at the inconsistencies in how the family treats Meg before and after the gap as supporting evidence. Pre-cancellation Meg is loved by her family. Post-cancellation Meg is the household punching bag. The two versions of her cannot be the same person because the families surrounding her behave like different families. The simpler explanation is that the writer's room turned over during the cancellation years, and the new writers chose a meaner direction. The fan theory chooses the more interesting answer. The two shows are different shows. The third piece of evidence comes from the spin-off. American Dad and Family Guy share creators, share a network, share many of the same writers, and share, in some readings, the same fictional universe. Stan Smith, the lead character of American Dad, has mentioned Brian by name in his own show. Stan, in one episode, lists the dogs he likes the most. Brian Griffin appears on the list. Stan calls him his #1 favorite fictional dog. The use of the word fictional is not casual. The character is being identified on screen in another show as a fictional being by a character who himself is fictional, and who is presumably aware of himself as a real being inside his own fictional universe. There's a sequence in American Dad where the show pauses to celebrate its 1000th vagina joke. The celebration involves the actors stepping out of their characters, the crew appearing on screen, and the soundstage being revealed. The fourth wall does not just break, it collapses. The episode treats the cast and crew of American Dad as the actual people behind the production, with Stan Smith and his family understood as performers playing roles. If American Dad is a show within American Dad, and if Stan watches Family Guy as fiction, then the implication is that the entire universe both shows occupy is a stack of nested televisions. Family Guy is real to the audience watching it on Fox. American Dad is real to the audience watching it on Fox. American Dad is fiction to Family Guy. Family Guy is fiction to American Dad. Neither show holds the privileged position of being more real than the other. The fourth piece of evidence is the Brian writing theory. The argument is that the entire show is a novel that Brian Griffin is writing. Brian is, across the run of Family Guy, identified as a struggling novelist. He has written manuscripts, he has tried to get them published, he has been rejected, he has, in some episodes, succeeded briefly and then failed again. The fan theory argues that Family Guy itself is one of his manuscripts. The theory holds that the early seasons, when the show is more grounded and the family is more recognizable as actual people, represent Brian's serious attempt at literary fiction. The post-revival seasons, when the show becomes more cartoonish, more cruel, more committed to over-the-top gags, represent Brian's gradual decline as a writer. As his alcoholism worsens, the writing gets sloppier. As his discipline fails, the family gets meaner. The flanderization of the characters, the term fans use for how the family has gotten more exaggerated over the years, is not a mistake on the part of the actual writer's room. It is a deliberate choice on the part of Brian, the in-universe author, who is writing worse and worse novels as his life falls apart. The theory has obvious problems. Brian appears on screen. Brian is a character within the world he supposedly writes. Brian dies in season 12 and the show keeps going. None of these things fit cleanly with him being the author of the whole thing. The theory survives because it explains, more elegantly than any other reading, why the show has changed the way it has over the decades. The shift in tone tracks Brian's drinking. The shift in cruelty tracks Brian's depression. The audience is reading a novel by a man who is getting worse. The fifth piece of evidence is the show's casual breaking of the fourth wall. Family Guy makes jokes about being on Fox. The characters know they are on television. Peter, in the first episode of the revival, opens with a long monologue listing every show that Fox canceled in the years that Family Guy was off the air. Peter is, in that scene, speaking as a character who knows his show was canceled. Stewie and Brian, in multiple episodes, refer to upcoming plot points, to future seasons, productions, to writers, to the network, to the audience. The show does not keep its world hermetically sealed. The world bleeds. The cartoon knows it is a cartoon. The family knows they are a family on a show. The audience is being told this, gently and constantly, throughout the entire run. What this all points at is a show that has, for over 25 years, been arguing that it is not real, in increasingly direct terms, while pretending to do other things. The Inside Family Guy episode is the loudest version of the argument. The Brian writing theory is the most elegant version. The American Dad crossover material is the strangest version. The constant fourth wall jokes are the most consistent version. All of them are saying the same thing. The Griffins are not happening. The Griffins are being made. The audience watching Family Guy is watching a piece of fiction that is, on some level, also watching itself. The reason most viewers do not notice this is that the show keeps the noticing optional. You can watch every episode of Family Guy and never think about the layers underneath. You can laugh at the giant chicken fights. You can enjoy the cutaway gags. You can think of the Griffins as a normal cartoon family doing normal cartoon things. The deeper material is sitting there for anyone who wants to find it, and ignored by anyone who would rather not. The show has built a comedy that works at the surface level, and a quieter set of arguments that work at the level below it. Both readings are available simultaneously. Neither cancels the other. This is the underlying structure of every conspiracy that has been covered across this video. Seth MacFarlane survived a hangover that should have killed him, and the show that came out of his survival has spent its run quietly working through the strangeness of getting to exist at all. The cancellations in the DVD revival made the show legally undead. The Boston Marathon hoax showed that the audience wanted the show to know things it did not know. The prediction conspiracy turned old jokes into prophecies. The banned episodes drew the network's only firm lines. The Brian death and resurrection demonstrated that nothing the show does is permanent. The Peter Insane theory tried to explain the whole premise as a grieving man's hallucination. The Stewie theories tried to explain a single character as four contradictory things at once. The Brian as Seth reading tried to explain why the show is so committed to mocking one specific dog. And the meta layer, the show within the show within the show, tried to explain why none of it has weight. Underneath all of these conspiracies is the same single observation. Family Guy is a show that should not exist, made by a man who should not be alive, telling jokes that should not be allowed about a family that may not be real, with a writer inside the family slowly losing his mind in a universe that another show keeps insisting is fictional. The conspiracies are not separate from the show. The conspiracies are the show, refracted through the audience trying to make sense of it. There is a final question worth holding in mind as the credits would normally roll on something like this. The show is still on the air. It is still producing new episodes. It has outlasted almost every comedy that aired alongside it. It has buried its competitors. It has survived its own cancellations, lawsuits, network blackouts, ratings collapses, and creative crises. It has done this for over a quarter of a century. The conspiracies have piled up because the show keeps giving them room to grow. There may be a simpler reason why the conspiracies cluster around this particular cartoon, more than around any other animated show in television history, and that reason has less to do with any single episode, and more to do with what kind of audience a show like this trains over 25 years of exposure. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.